everyone, and welcome to this latest episode and recording from the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight. I'm the Global Data and Tech Lead here at RICS, sitting in our regulatory standards and thought leadership part of the organisation. My role, which is quite a broad canvas, is to look at the whole implications and innovation and benefits that data and tech will bring to the whole built and natural environment. With over 130,000 members worldwide, we have members working right across the property life cycle in residential, commercial, alternative assets, infrastructure and land. So there's a really rich broad canvas where data and technology, as I say, can bring real value. Now, I'm really pleased to have Stewart Little from IRT Surveys back again today. We spoke a few months ago about his organisation and thermal tech imaging and how that helps with residential housing and retrofit. And I'm really keen today to actually explore a specific project up in Aberdeen. But before that, welcome, Stewart. And for those of perhaps who didn't catch our first conversation, it'd be great to hear a bit of a background on you, your team's experience, and the kind of origin story of IRT.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be back. I'm surprised you allowed me to come back a second time. I'm very pleased to be here. Yeah, our company is actually 20 years old in January next year. So my background is architectural. I was an architectural technician for 5 years. Then I spent 5 years of my life in the flat roofing world and roof garden, mainly for a German company called Bauder, and selling products to RICS surveyors. And 20 years ago, I saw a thermal imaging survey being done badly on a flat roof. And I thought, I can do that better than that person, I think. So I did a bit of investigating. I sat down with my wife first and said, look, do you mind if I quit my job and set up on my own? And my wife's a very Scottish school teacher, and she said, yeah, that's great, I'll support you, but please don't risk our house. It's a familiar story for most entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I then sat down with a friend of mine who at the time was the only businessman I knew that had set up his own company. And it happened to be a chap called Dave Jones, who wrote a computer game called Lemmings in the 90s, and then went on to write Grand Theft Auto. I sat down with Dave in his kitchen and said, look, these cameras are £40,000. I'm a regular guy. How does a regular guy get £40,000 for a camera? Buy a car, set up a company, find a lawyer, an accountant. And Dave very kindly said, look, I'll give you the investment you need to get you started. And that's what we started. We started doing thermal imaging and selling surveys to RICS surveyors to establish the condition of roofs with a view to how do you refurbish them? Why are they leaking? Where's it coming in? What's the extent of the moisture? How wet are they? Who caused it? A lot of conflict resolution, as I'm sure lots of your listeners will be familiar with. And it kind of moved on from there, really.
Great. Well, I'm glad you didn't take the Breaking Bad route. I suppose that program wasn't around at the time to lead you down that route. Well, it's great to hear. Now, we talked obviously last time in perhaps more general terms around the whole kind of residential retrofit piece and obviously the huge challenge that represents. Obviously today, it'd be great to hear about this specific project up in Aberdeen, which I think Aberdeen City Council has been running, or County Council, which is named DORIC. And I made the mistake of assuming that DORIC stood for some title that was derived from the architectural piece, but apparently from what you said to me earlier, this is to do with an Aberdonian accent. But do tell me a bit about the background to DORIC before we perhaps talk in more detail about what it's trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you the story of how we arrived at the net zero agenda, because it's pertinent for the whole country now, whole world actually. So our genesis went from thermal image flat roofs. So very quickly saying, like, if we're going to drive all the way to Birmingham from Dundee, we might as well do the whole building envelope. Then we did about 5,000 house surveys for Aberdeen Council in about 2003. And the feedback we got was, that's great, but ultimately they're just pretty pictures.
Yeah.
We raised a bit, we took that's good feedback. We took that feedback on board and said, look, it would be great if we could quantify these pictures, if we could show people the money and the carbon that was being emitted by literally adding value to them. We added value to them. So we raised a bit of venture capital. We did that. we went back to the same client and said, look, now we can add value to them. What do you think? And we did about 20,000 more for Aberdeen. And they said, their feedback was brilliant, because they said, that's much better. But what you very accurately described is we definitely have a headache. What's the aspirin?
Yeah.
So we went back to our VCs again and said, look, we need to automate retrofit decision making. It's too complicated. When you take on board things like SAP, the weather, the eco funding mechanism, all the different government schemes, the utility companies' appetite for investment, everything fluctuates too often. So there is a Venn diagram out there that says these are the houses that we can invest in, this is what they need, but it's quite hard to find, and people often go off on the round reel, as we say up here, which is the wrong furrow.
Yes.
You go down the wrong one and invest all your money and then regret the decisions. So we wrote software that automates the retrofit decision-making process. And then quite fortuitously, the government launched the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund last year. And that was aimed that was a challenge that directly aligns with the solutions that we'd already spent 10 years developing. So we approached Aberdeen Council and said, look, the government have got this pot of money. It's all about engaging social housing tenants. It's about getting them on that decarbonisation journey. We've got lots of tools. You're a familiar client. Can we put forward a proposal and create a little consortium? So we engaged Robertson Group, who are a big housing contractor in Scotland and beyond. They're our main contractor on the project. We brought investment from a PLC called SMS. We brought smart metering from a company called Switchy, so we can actually monitor the temperature, humidity, and CO2 within the properties. But essentially, we put 22,000 houses into our DRIAM platform.
Right.
We found about 2,000 that fitted Bayes criteria, because the investment criteria is you have to get houses below 50 kilowatt hours per square meter.
Right.
Which is quite a challenge, especially in Scotland. But we found about 2,000 houses that did that. Then we refined it to say, out of those 2,000, which ones are geographically dense, that are appealing to the contractor, which ones are south-facing, that are applicable for PV, and which ones meet the ISH criteria. We have something in Scotland called the energy efficiency of social Scottish housing, or Scottish social housing, I forget which way around it is. But we cherry-picked 500 that were absolutely ideal. Then we thermal imaged them to say, look, let's assume that the data is not perfect. Let's go and do thermal imaging to validate the data. We thermal imaged them. We then refined that to 250 houses. And of the 250, we engaged an RICS surveyor to go in and do retrofit assessment. We're doing retrofit coordination. We did air pressure testing, and we did intrusive in-depth thermal imaging. So we could help them mitigate risk from disrepair claims. We could help identify the root source of mold and grow. Why are these houses cold when the records say they've been insulated? And that sort of thing. But that's taken about 11 months to get to that point.
So what value are people already seeing? What stage are we in the project?
We're live on site now. I'll show some screenshots for you.
Sure.
If I can. So that's a company there. That's my brother and I. He's our R&D chemist by trade. Dave, you can Wikipedia him. He's over in America now. He's one of the guys behind the game Fortnite. Let me just get to the right slide. So we do have drones in the sky and things if we're doing high-rise buildings. But the Aberdeen project is called DRIAM. So DRIAM is a dynamic retrofit energy and asset management platform. This is a cloud-based tool that does all the data monkey work behind the scenes, essentially. But when I know this isn't a sales presentation, but if you think of it as sat nav to savings, that's what we're doing. We're trying to say, look, the net zero journey is like any journey. We need to establish honestly, where are you today, agree the destination, and then optimize the journey, optimize the route. So it's all about finding, funding, and solving problems. And then verifying that the work's been done properly in an impartial manner. So the DRIAM platform, we basically, those 22,000 houses in Aberdeen, we plop them into the portal, and we can very, very quickly target areas that are in deprived areas, that are on gas, off gas grid, that sort of thing. And we can slice and dice that data in any manner. If the client says, look, my target is, I want to achieve a C, which most social housing providers are aiming for these days, it's quite easy to say, well, there's 131,000 of them, and here's what you need to do to achieve that. Here's the grant funding that's available for them. Here's the CO2 mapping of where's the worst offenders. That's more data on grants. Then the thermal imaging side of it is the bit that says, look, the data says those cavities are full, but look at this thermal image. The green are good, the red is where it's missing. So no matter how much money you spend on PV and batteries and air source heat pumps, you will never get the return on investment because the building isn't insulated properly. So it's a nice visually engaging way to do that. Then the quantification piece, that's a really good tool to help engage and compel action. So you can really engage the homeowner in that journey to say, look, your neighbour on the left, that's a well insulated house. Look at yours. The red, yellow and white is all energy loss. And if you let insulate the house, there's the money, the carbon and the kilowatts that you'll save. And that's the journey. So the SHDF thing, there are 17 demonstrators in the UK at the moment. We're one of 3 in Scotland. And these are the headline. It was quite interesting as well. Out of the 250 that we engaged with, about 100 residents said, no, thank you. I don't want £50,000 worth of free things done to my house, which is quite, well,
has there been any kind of feedback, sort of quant research to try and work out what that behavioural barrier is? Because as you say, I mean, is there a perceived level of disruption involved that puts people off? Or
I think, to be honest, a lot of the people in social housing, a lot of them are quite elderly. And I mean, we had like an 84-year-old lady say, look, no, thank you. I've got a lifetime of memories in my attic. I don't want to disturb them. I don't live in most of the house. I'm happy to sit in my living room with my little fire on. So you have to respect people's views and things, Andrew. So most people said, yes, please, when can I get the measures? But about 100 said, I just don't want the disruption. But it's when the things that we've learned in the last 11 months about the actual process. So you really need, I'm a big fan of the RICS, Andrew. The surveying part is absolutely fundamental that that's done properly. Because you can only go so far at a desktop level.
Yeah.
So what we're doing on site are things like, look, we cannot put EWI on all 4 walls because there's an integrated garage. So how do we, that's an external wall, the garage is unheated, but how do we insulate that external wall? Because if we insulate inside, we can't open the garage door. So we have to change the garage door to a roller door instead of an up and over door, or put internal wall insulation on that wall. And if we put internal on it, how does that work with the junction? How does it integrate with the external? And how do you avoid a cold bridge at that point? So the PAS 2035 compliance is really critical. And that role of the retrofit coordinator, to my mind, I think that's ideally suited to RICS surveyors.
As you say, that there's that limitation on what you can do with all the, the sophisticated technology, putting those data sets together and looking at the thermal image, but you do end up rolling the kind of virtual sleeve up, don't you, and having somebody on site looking at that particular property and saying, well, what are those idiosyncrasies about that property? What's actually going to have to be done? And as you say, that critical supervision to make sure that actually the work is done correctly and done in a way that will deliver the results. Yeah,
I mean, everyone's cut back on that clerk of works role. And back in my days when I was a technician, there were clerk of works, and every contract was JCT 80, and the architect was super important, the surveyor was super important, but it's been diluted with the design and build type mentality and the PFI and the PPP and all these different contracts that are out there. But that is the role of the retrofit coordinator. Visit site, make sure the design is compliant, and make sure the works are compliant, and really genuinely oversee it.
I mean, one thing that strikes me from what you're saying is, and as you and I both know, given our involvement with the Coalition for Energy Efficient Buildings, is the somewhat eye-watering scale of the challenge around the UK in terms of the number of properties that need to be retrofitted. And clearly, what you've done is use the technology to zero into almost the best candidates. And I suppose the challenge is how do we then, at scale, both in terms of government finance and private sector finance from owner occupiers, how do we begin to address, dare I say, the less attractive properties? Because clearly, if I use the phrase cherry pick, the properties that make most sense at the moment, we're still going to be left with a hugely long tail, aren't we? And I guess it's a challenge of both finance, but also having enough skilled people to oversee the work, as we've just discussed.
Yeah, it's a massive undertaking, but it's like eating an elephant, Andrew. We have to do it slice by slice. I think there's 28 million houses in the UK. About 18 million of them are owner occupiers. 4.5 million are in the private rented sector, and about 4.5 million are in the social housing sector. Hopefully that adds up to about 27, 28.
Yeah.
So a lot of the government focus with the eco funding has been targeted directly at social housing providers. For about 10 years, schemes like eco, it's gone through lots of permutations, but a lot of that's been about helping the most deprived. But that's all changing. Next year, that's changing to encompass the owner-occupier sector. But it's quite difficult to engage. To reach the social housing sector is relatively easy.
Yeah.
You've got a couple of thousand clients that own 4.5 million houses. So our DRIAM software is aimed at that sector. We are launching an app version of DRIAM called Hero, with 2 E's. I love a cheesy acronym, DRIAM. The Hero app is the Housing Energy Efficiency Retrofit Optimizer. But that does everything you've seen on DRIAM, but on your phone for your house.
All right, okay.
But the funding part is still tricky, because there's legislation coming for the private rented sector that says that you can't sell these houses in 2025 unless there is C. So the route to how do I achieve a C, for 18 million houses, and some of them are better than C, but there are about 4.8 million that are D, E, F, and G on an EPC. And a lot of the EPCs are inaccurate. So it could actually be 5 or 6 million that are in that D category. So staying abreast of that lends itself beautifully to software. But ultimately, there could be about 18 million physical surveys that need to be done, which is a lot of work for RICS surveyors. So we're trying to... Sorry.
Yeah, carry on, Stuart.
I was just going to say, we've got tools that separate the needles from the haystack, Andrew, and say, look, those are the target houses that can do with a retrofit. And our software is developed in such a manner that it is solution agnostic. We're not trying to push any product.
Yeah.
That's another big problem in the industry, that you've got all sorts of vested interests pushing their own agenda. You've got the utility companies saying hydrogen is the solution, mainly because they've got all the pipes there to produce hydrogen, and it's easy to pump into the house. There's other people making boilers that are microwave boilers.
Yeah.
And there's other people pushing air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, insulation. There's people gluing themselves to the M25 to push insulation. But for me, it's always about, I see buildings like buckets with holes in them. And if we only plug one hole, we just increase the pressure on the other holes. So we need to do a fabric first, a complete envelope, fix all the problems, insulate tight, ventilate right, and then do all the renewables. But for the financial people out there, they really want to do everything in one hit. And for the contractors out there as well, they want to do that. If they're putting the scaffolding up to put external wall insulation on, they really want to do the PV at the same time. So it's trying to do fabric first with renewables and fund it.
Yeah,
But there are,
but as you say, put the right, as you say, fabric has to be addressed, but you do then need the appropriate heating systems to go with it, because I mean, I live in an Edwardian semi, and I'm guessing that mine probably wouldn't be suitable for heat pump. It's going to have to be a different solution once the fabric has been made as good as it can be, given it's a 1905 house. So.
Yeah, it is really tricky, Andrew. My house is 1883, and I've insulated it as best I can, but it's grade B listed, so I can't do anything to the external facades. So my walls are stone, but it's double glazed. I've sealed the windows, I've replaced the windows and doors, and I've put PV on my garage because it was legal. I was allowed to do it, and I've got batteries in the garage as well. So I'm on a flexible tariff, so I can charge my battery up at night for about 2 or 3 times, use it in the morning with the dishwasher and the microwave and the shower and what have you, then charge it up again during the day from the PV, use that. And at the moment that runs, my battery lasts until about 11 o'clock at night in the summer, powering. And I've got a wife and 2 teenagers, so our TVs are on, always some phone on charge somewhere.
Some device, yeah. But I guess I suppose it's an indication that there's no kind of single silver bullet, is there? For different properties in different parts of the UK, there's going to have to be, as you say, that fabric first approach, but then look at what's best for that particular property. There's going to be no single fix, I guess, in terms of the kind of renewable interventions that are possible.
Yeah, and every house is different. I mean, everyone listening to this call will say, we can break it down in software and say there are 200 archetypes. Here's what we do for a semi-detached bungalow in Aberdeen, but a semi-detached bungalow in Devon will look completely different.
Exactly, yeah.
And there will be everywhere.
So what do you think specifically in Aberdeen will be next steps? Obviously the project's ongoing, to use that horrible phrase, but what do you foresee being next steps for Aberdeen, or indeed rolling this similar project out to other Scottish cities?
Yeah, well, that's, as I said, it's one of 17 demonstrators, and the whole point of the BAYS initiative is to take it beyond demonstration and into various waves. So BAYS have got about, I think it's 3.9 billion they're investing in the sector to scale it. So wave 1 is out now. Those projects will be announced in the next couple of weeks, and that is like what we've done in Aberdeen, but bigger. We know the Welsh government are doing something similar. Scottish government have got something similar. But the SHDF doesn't include Scotland or Wales, I don't think. I think it's England only.
Indeed.
But that's the mission, is just basically cookie cutter what the demonstration projects have done and scale it. But it needs about 350, 400 billion to be spent. It's a massive surveying opportunity. Hey, Andrew?
Yeah.
You're
still there, Stuart. We might have to do a little bit of an edit there. Do you want to perhaps re-answer that question about next steps for Aberdeen and indeed more generally?
Yeah, well, in Aberdeen, we're physically on site doing the retrofit measures just now. So some houses are getting cavity and lofts, some are getting underfloor and external wall insulation. Some we just couldn't get to work with the PV and the batteries. For one reason or another, they just weren't suitable.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a blend going on in Aberdeen, but everyone's agreed that we're going to take it beyond the BAYS funded element. So the idea is to just keep going in little plugs of 500 until we've done everything that's possible. But you do meet resistance all along the way, Andrew, from tenants and residents, utility companies, even things like the gas meter box on the outside of your house is owned by the utility companies. So you can agree to externally insulate, but to actually do it, you need to move the meter, and that can take about 3 months to get permission to move it, and you're not allowed to move it because it's gas or electric.
It's those little things that almost get in the way, isn't it? The things that you don't think are actually going to be such a barrier, and the kind of just the time taken. So
these are the things we've been learning this year, Andrew, on site. Is things like people saying, if you put another 150 mil insulation on my wall, I can't get my wheelchair around the path to get my wheelie bins at the back. So you're going to have to make my path wider to go round. And I don't want you to make my path wider because I spent £20 at B&Q buying azaleas in my borders. So there's all sorts of little things that are very personal to people. This is their pride and joy.
We have to remember that ultimately these are homes that people live in, and there are these, you know, emotional, some might call them irrational type reactions that are part of what we have to take into account. Well, it's been fascinating as ever to talk again today, Stewart, and it's great to hear the progress you're making. The challenge remains clearly to scale up and, as you said, take each bite of the elephant as you go along, but obviously also a huge opportunity for our RICS surveyors to get involved, and a huge challenge for the sector as well to skill up and scale up to do what has to be a huge project eventually that covers the whole of the UK. So something that I assume will take a few years, but let's hope that we can get that journey and the data and tech can support it, as well as then working with people on the ground to actually do the work. So it's been great to talk, and I look forward to catching up again next year.
Good man. Andrew, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.